Hello, welcome to my channel. I make videos about my art process, and today I'm going to be underglaze painting this porcelain mug with a vintage scientific illustration, and I'll add a simple Japanese-inspired pattern to the background as well. As a brief content warning, I just want to let you know I'm going to be talking about animals as meat throughout this video. Hopefully that's obvious from the thumbnail and the illustration that I'm painting. I'm not going to go into graphic detail about meat processing or anything, but I'm also not going to be tiptoeing around the fact that meat comes from animals, because that's sort of a central theme in my art right now, is this conflicting feelings about eating meat and humans being animals who are ourselves made of meat. Also, before I get into it, I want to take this moment to let you know how you can support Palestine if that's something you're interested in doing. If you want to support the Free Palestine movement but you aren't sure how, I recommend you check out the BDS website, which is the Palestinian-led Boycott, Divestment, and Sanctions movement, to see how you can support them by boycotting certain companies like Chevron and Disney+. I'll link to their website and their Instagram below. So this illustration I'm using is from a book published in 1867, and this book is called The Market Assistant, containing a brief description of every article of human food sold in the public markets of the cities of New York, Boston, Philadelphia, and Brooklyn, including the various domestic and wild animals, poultry, game, fish, vegetables, fruits, etc., etc., with many curious incidents and anecdotes, by Thomas F. DeVoe, author of the Market Book, etc. DeVoe tells us in the introduction of his book that many of these engravings were sketched by him from nature, and although some of them may not be what he wanted them to be, the faulty drawing of such must not rest on the engraver, Stephen Weeks, Esquire. So it sounds like the author, Thomas DeVoe, sketched these various cuts of meat from life, and then he gave the sketches to Stephen Weeks, Esquire, the engraver, who then engraved the plates, which would have been used to print copies of the book with the printing press. I don't know if anyone else finds this interesting, but I think it's really cool to hear details like this about how creative work has been made in the past. And I especially appreciate this author including this detail in his book, because in my experience, a lot of print media from this time period doesn't include any credit to the illustrators, so it can be impossible to figure out who drew the pictures. I got started down this rabbit hole when I was searching for non-copyrighted illustrations to use in my own art. And I just think these pieces are really beautiful. I love being able to give them a new life and get to have this sort of conversation or interaction with artists from 150 years ago. Okay, so I'm starting out as usual by sketching the illustration in pencil on the mug, figuring out what size I want the drawing to be and where to place it and all that. And now I'm using my kneaded eraser to gently lighten the marks so I can see where to paint without missing any lines while I'm painting. This illustration's a pretty complicated one, so I definitely wanted to draw it all out before painting. And even then I did end up messing up a tiny bit, so it's not 100% identical to the original piece, but I don't think you can tell unless you're really looking for it. But I'm sorry to this particular veal for not including all of your bones correctly. I know it's not called a veal, but I feel like that's a more fun word to say than a calf. Calf sounds like a leg, veal sounds like a seal. I don't know why that's better. I'm using my squeeze bottle with the needle tip here. The needle tip is pretty much always what I use when I'm painting something with such small details, because a brush would just take way too long to paint all of it. By the way, this porcelain mug was made by my mom. She and I collaborate together on a lot of pottery. She'll typically throw the pieces and bisque fire them, and then they get handed over to me to do the underglaze painting. Also, sometimes she'll paint on it too. She likes to paint animals like cats and frogs and stuff. I'll show some of those on the screen right now. These ones I just paint the patterns in the background, and then I'll hand the finished piece back to her and she'll clear glaze and fire it, and then it's actually done. I don't think I've talked on here yet about how my mom and I started working together, but it came from her getting really into wheel throwing during the first few years of COVID, and it turned out she didn't really care for the glazing part, so she ended up with all this unfinished bisqueware in her house, which I've heard is a pretty common scenario for a lot of potters to find themselves in. But anyway, I went over one time and I asked if I could paint some of them, because to me that's the fun part. I used to go to those paint your own pottery studios and I would pay $25 to paint a single mug, and now I get to do that all the time just for the cost of buying my own underglaze. And people will pay me to then own the mug. It's kind of amazing. I just feel really lucky that our interests line up so well that we can work on this project together. Okay, I'm just adding in the final touches of the illustration here, the caption, and I'm going to go around the outside to thicken up the outline and just make it pop a bit more. Now it's time to add the red background. I'm going around with a round pointy brush and leaving a little gap of bare white clay around the very edges of the illustration. Sometimes I will paint right up to the edge of the illustration rather than leaving that gap. It just depends on the piece, and I felt like the white space looked nice here. And I also like how it connects the drawing to the caption, so it looks like they could have all been cut out of one piece of paper together. I'm switching back and forth between that smaller round brush and a bigger flat brush, depending on which part of the mug I'm painting. And I do this for 3 layers of red underglaze. I decided to make the red extend a bit farther over the rim of the mug. I just thought it looked more balanced. A lot of my decisions around what areas of the piece to paint are based around the proportions of the piece itself. So I end up going with my gut and deciding what to do individually from one piece to the next, rather than having a standard one way that I paint every single mug. I think this also helps me not get bored with the process because each piece is handmade, so no two are exactly identical. And so every time I paint a piece, it's a new and unique problem-solving experience to figure out the best way to balance it out. I'm going to paint a Japanese-inspired pattern around the outside of the mug, so here I'm showing you some of the books that I use as reference. I've been using this Samurai Patterns book for a while now, but I just bought the other 3 recently, so I'm really excited to use some of those patterns in my upcoming pieces. If you're curious why I use Japanese patterns specifically, there are a couple reasons. The simple reason is I just find them to be very aesthetically pleasing. Maybe this is due to growing up around Japanese fabrics and designs, or maybe I would have found them pretty no matter what my cultural background was. I'm not really sure. Also, these patterns are all super old and definitely not copyrighted, so I can't get in any legal trouble for borrowing from them, which is great. The other more complicated reason I gravitate towards using these patterns is because my relationship with Japanese culture is itself kind of confusing and complicated, and the things in my life that are confusing and complicated are often the things that I end up thinking about and exploring in my artwork. So I ended up settling on this extremely simple pattern that's literally just repeated dashed lines going all around the outside of the mug. I'm using a pencil to mark a few straight lines around the mug just to keep myself on track so my lines don't get too crooked as I go. I felt like this pattern was a good fit for this mug because the illustration is really complicated and I didn't want to overwhelm it with a background that was competing for attention. And also, I think this dashed line pattern hits a nice middle ground between being aesthetically pleasing and a little bit unappetizing. It really looks like leg hair stubble to me, or kind of like the skin of a plucked chicken. There's something just a little yucky about it, but not in any specific way, and I like that. And the last thing I have to add, of course, is the credit to the original artist. Even though it's not required by copyright or anything, I like to include it because maybe if someone buys this piece, they'll be interested in knowing more about the original context of the art, just like I am, and then they can go down the rabbit hole and find out. And maybe this mug will end up in a Value Village somewhere years from now, and somebody will pick it up and see the drawing and the name and be like, oh my God, that's my great-great-uncle Stephen Esquire. That would be pretty cool. Actually, please leave a comment if Stephen Weeks, Esquire, professional engraver, was actually your great uncle. If not, please do not comment, and also unsubscribe. This channel is only for Stephen Weeks' descendants now. Okay, well, I hope you enjoyed me rambling at you. I'm trying something a little different with this voiceover thing. If you want to see more of me and my mom's work, you can click the links in the description for our social media, website links, etc. And I'll also link to Good Earth Pottery, which is where you can buy our work. Thanks for watching. I hope you have a great day, and also remember to check out BDS to support Palestine.